How fast is the Aprilia RSV4 factory compared to the Tuono, but also compared to the Panigale and the BMW RR? The answer in this video. Yes, folks, today I'm lucky. Today I've got the chance to compare quite a few bikes here at the 1000 PS HotLap Test track in Bad Fischau. A tight course, a brilliant little motorcycle track where I also get to ride bikes like the RSV4 Factory. Earlier I was on the RR from BMW. I also rode the Panigale V4S from Ducati, the Street Fighter V4S, and the Tuono V4 Factory. So I can now place this machine among a wild potpourri of dream bikes. And I even rode a Harley-Davidson Road Glide. And I've got to say, mate, what's going on again? Why do I once more need to pull out new superlatives? But this RSV4 Factory, I'll say it right from the start. If there's someone who knows how to build a fantastic motorcycle chassis in terms of geometry so that it just tips in beautifully, then it's Aprilia. There's got to be some guy sitting at an old drawing board, sketching the lines, someone who's really got the knack. He probably drew the 250 frames for Max Biaggi back in the day, and he's the same guy who's drawing and designing these things here. It's approachable, appetizing and harmonious. When you lean it into the bend, you just can't miss the line. You couldn't ride badly enough to mess up hitting the apex and getting a clean drive out again. It's pure joy how this bike eats up the perfect line. Pure joy how smooth and harmonious the steering feels. And here's the thing, even in the tightest hairpins, the kind that the Stelvio Pass simulates for us here, with this completely overpowered bike that's actually totally out of place, we only ever need first and second gear. Even then, it's still a joy to ride through the bends. Was it all perfect bliss? Well, not absolutely everything. I've got to admit, by now it's more or less the same with nearly all superbikes. I have the problem that in the saddle I can't heave myself from one side to the other quickly enough. In these really tight chicanes here, it feels a bit too much like a gym workout for me. I can't put enough dynamic energy into the bike, and modern superbikes are just a bit too radical in that respect. Although, because this concept is already a little older, it's still easier for me to handle than the Panigale I rode earlier. So yes, the riding position is acceptable, but for a tall rider trying to carry out quick dynamic maneuvers in everyday riding or when shifting body position, I'd rather avoid that. Because the thing is, if you just stay seated here on the saddle on a country road, a mountain pass, or on a course, it's pure joy how you can guide it with just the slightest touch on the bars. Absolutely wonderful. And then there's the saddle, which is really made for the road, for a road-going bike, with that nice hollow shape where you sit properly, well positioned, and it feels just right. But once you start sliding around a bit, you notice, this is a road bike, really, it needs a different seat that gives you more options for shifting your position. But as I said, for riders on the road, or for those who still like riding supersport bikes on the street, they'll be pleased with how well you sit on it. You don't need to go for elbow down techniques, you just sit upright and guide it gently, like a conductor with his baton, driving the orchestra beneath you towards a best lap. Yes, just to complete the picture, the suspension, the brakes, all of that works brilliantly. The throttle response is totally practical. You can really use the power and this high-tech, state-of-the-art machine. And it's fun as well. That's not something you can take for granted. I looked at it and thought, oh, this is going to be torture on a tight course like this. But it wasn't. It was 10 enjoyable laps, even on the tight course, and the hairpins were fun too. So if you're someone who still enjoys riding mountain passes with a Supersport, this is a bike that does the job really well. What was quite surprising compared to the 210 is that it was less demanding because you've got less torque down in the basement of the revs thanks to the longer gearing. The engine character meant that I actually found it less tiring in the really tight hairpins and a bit more pleasant to ride. I know, the hardcore guys will spit on me for saying that. Now he's happy about less torque, but honestly, it's something I've experienced time and again, that these 1000cc superbikes in practice are actually not such a bad thing when they've got a bit less torque down low. Because if you're trying to give it everything for 10 laps, draining all the energy from your body, that can actually be easier to manage. And I have to be honest, riding this here was nicer than riding the 210 I was on earlier. That was just brutal. And I'm simply not fit enough anymore for that. Things have shifted so much that nowadays these insane torque monsters, the naked bikes, are actually harsher in tight corners than the superbikes, which are more harmonious and a bit softer in the torque basement. How does it line up against the BMW RR and the Ducati? Well, they're all fantastic bikes. But this brilliance, this feeling you get from the front end, and the way you can just hit the line so easily without having to be some master of riding technique, no need for elbow down, aiming precisely, shifting weight forward and low, none of that is necessary. You give it the tiniest input and it just devours your inside line. And it does that better than any other superbike. The fascinating part is, tomorrow or the day after, Martin Bauer and Max will be riding at the Slovakia Ring, and we'll be comparing the superbikes there. And I already know that even Martin Bauer, who rides 10 leagues above me, will also be satisfied with the Aprilia's handling and will say this chassis is brilliant. And that really is the ultimate accolade, when both a talentless rider and a completely talented rider appreciate the handling of the same bike. That's the accolade, and that's why I know, hands down, this is the best motorcycle chassis in the superbike class straight out of the box, from my point of view. Yes, folks, for me, it's been a fantastic experience. I'm curious to hear what Aprilia RSV4 riders have to say. Post it down below. Where do you agree with me? And where do you see it differently based on your own experience? As always, merciless, brutally honest here on 1000 PS TV. Leave your comments below. Thanks, bye, and see you soon.